Jay, how are you? Welcome back.
Good morning, Chris.
Well, 11:40. Yeah, that's morning. Yeah.
My friend in California. I'm on with him. That's good. We talked last time a little off the archaeological subject a little bit. A couple of things, and one of them was about the death of Kennedy, and he was shot on full national television in full daytime when I was a senior in high school in 1961. And it's the biggest, this coup in the United States was the biggest thing that's happened in my lifetime. So I've been very interested in this for quite a while. I have a lot of books on it, been reading it. And what's very upsetting is the people that were involved and what it means about our country, which is very different than what I thought. The more I learn about it, the more upset you can get. But at any rate, I wanted to tell a story about it. Susie and I were on a cruise ship in the Baltic, and there was a lecture scheduled in Stockholm. And after the food, the speaker was Gorbachev. He's given a lot of talks since he was premier of the Soviet Union. So a lot of people have heard him. His talk was primarily about glasnost and things like that, which was interesting. There was an expensive cruise, so a lot of people were heads of departments of surgery here and there and so on. It's quite an exquisite audience. And Gorbachev got a standing ovation when he came in during the lunch. And he got another ovation when he left at the end. The people really appreciate what he did for ending the Cold War, liberating all the countries that were part of the Soviet Union around Russia. He discussed how people objected to his handling of the thing, because handling of the breakup of the Soviet Union, because that they should have charged fees to the countries to get free because they had to bring all their soldiers home and they had no place to put them and they had to provide housing and so on. So he says, well, those countries should have paid for it. And there was a popular feeling among the population. He said that should have been done. But he said, no, that in fact, they stole all of the countries to begin with. They didn't pay for them. So he said, we got them for free, so we had to give them for free. He's an interesting guy. And he had an interpreter, but I think he understood English pretty well anyway. At any rate, I had an option. I was sitting kind of in front, and with a bright blue shirt, and I was able to be seen. And I raised my hand, and they called on me out of about maybe, he talked for an hour and then took about 4 questions. I was lucky to be able to ask a question. And I wanted to ask him about what the Soviet Union knew about UFOs. But I asked my other question. I didn't think I could ask 2 under the circumstances. So I asked him a question. What did the Soviet Union know about the assassination of John Kennedy, and when did they know it? What did they know and when? And it was I don't think he'd been asked that before, because he skirted his chair was up on a die above us, a little dais above us, and he skirted his chair back and stared at the ceiling for quite a while. Maybe 15 seconds or so. He's looking at the ceiling, trying to figure out what he's going to say to this guy. So I think people will be interested in the answer. It took him a while to answer, but he drew down to the audience and he said, Reinoud. Oh, and he had previously talked about how there had been an attempt on his life. And so these guys at the top are very aware of this kind of thing and interested in this subject. He drew his chair back and he said, well, last time that I was down in Dallas, I did all the tourist things. I went up into the depository and I looked at the gunshot route, the shot the guy had to take. He says, I've watched all the films And I've thought quite a bit about it. And as you know, he did hem a little there, and he says, as you know, a lot of the documentation about this event has been hidden from the public for 50 years, 40 years, whatever it was. Anyway, the time came and went, and they didn't release much of it. He says, I think that once that stuff is all out, that it will be clear to you that it was a conspiracy. And then he went to a next question. But I think that he maybe has some inside track to knowing more than most people. What was I going to say about it? I just it basically confirmed a lot of the readings that I've done, that there's no question that it was a conspiracy. Oh, I was just going to say that, all the people he's talking to are going to be dead before the information comes out. So anyway. But anyway, I told you yesterday that with all the readings I've done on this subject, that I had made a list, and as I went through a number of books. I have hundreds of books, and I wanted to show you. This is a list of some of the names that I've taken down, and just to show you the number. Okay, there's a lot of people and a lot of stories that come out in the books when you study this subject. It's not simple, and some of the ones that I've highlighted in pink, as you saw in this list, the ones that are primarily involved, that I think are involved with criminal behavior, include LBJ, his next door neighbor, who he walked the dog with for 20 years, J. Edgar Hoover, who actually wasn't involved in the killing, but did eliminate a lot of people that could have spoken about it afterward. Paley, Henry Luce of Life, Carlos Marcello, Harvard Hunt, William Harvey, Cord Meyer of the CIA, David Phillips here at the CIA, David Sanchez Morales, General Edward Lansdale, one of the main figures, Richard Helms, Alan Dulles, H.W. Bush, LeMay, Lemnitzer, H.L. Hunt, and so on. There's just the Dallas mayor, R.L. Thornton, George Lumpkin, assistant police chief in Dallas, Bill Greer, John. There's a lot of people that know a lot that haven't said much, and that's because they're implicated. They didn't necessarily pull the trigger. We know who did that, but he's in prison and hasn't been killed. But he shot. But a lot of these people gave an implicit permission. Yeah, it's okay with me, because they had a lot of motivations to. He wanted to do away with the CIA, said he would blow it to the winds, so four corners of the winds, after he was embarrassed by the Cuban affair, and he wanted to do away with the oil depletion allowance for the oil companies to pay a fair amount of tax, and he just had a lot of people that were happy with him being eliminated, and it damaged the United States during my whole lifetime.
And so explain that just a little more, Jay, and just speak as clearly as you can that that he was going to do a tax to the oil companies. Is that right?
Yeah, they get they get a depletion allowance for using up the oil out of the land. It's way down deep under it's maybe 300 feet down, but they get a cash depletion allowance against it to reduce their profits for what has been sucked out of the ground, which is unusual. I mean, the timber companies don't get that. They go cut the timber off a mountain side. They don't get a tax deduction for the timber that's been cut. But, it's just a very unusual thing, which was set up to help the oil companies.
And so all those
oil, I mean, we're getting dividends, but it's not fair. and it's not needed anymore, and it's damaging the world health. So that needs to be done about it.
So all those people on that list, you're saying know something or were involved somehow.
Correct. In the criminal behavior, all of them.
And so why were you saying about the kind of founding of the CIA being a disaster? Since at the beginning, the whole thing, like,
well, when Kennedy became president, he found that the CIA was involved in 4 wars that he didn't know about.
Wow.
One of them was in Africa, Lumumba, and there were 2 others. And then there's this Cuban thing where, they had essentially set him up so that he had to send in the aircraft from aircraft carriers that were swarming around Cuba in order to save the little invasion that the CIA had set up. I mean, he felt he'd been boxed in where he didn't have much choice. They were forcing him into a war, and he was very unhappy about it. And the other thing the public don't know about Cuba, which is interesting, is that there were 3 submarines under the American fleet that were patrolling Cuba and keeping at the time of we were trying to get the missile ships turned around under the American fleet, which was blockading Cuba. There were 3 Russian submarines, and they were diesel subs, but they had atomic warheads in them. Oh, and the other thing that the public doesn't know, and that the president didn't know, is that not only were there missiles which have been seen by the satellites from space, but there were tactical nuclear missile, tactical atomics in Cuba. If we'd attacked, there would have been an atomic war. At any rate, these submarines, 2 of them were able to just scurry away, but one of them was out of oxygen, and the guys could hardly breathe anymore because they're running there. They had to surface to generate, like these diesel submarines do. They have to surface to get recharge their batteries and stuff. So they were in a hard spot. They were they had a choice to die or to surface or what. And one guy on the submarine wanted to nuke the fleet and go down in glory like he was supposed to. And the Russian commissar is a communist, they say he was the Communist Party representative on the boat, actually had a power over the commander of the submarine and said, no, we're going to surface. And they did, and the Americans saw them, and they actually powered on the surface away. But if they had sent a nuclear missile up and blown away an American ship above them, it would have been World War III. We were very close to it. That person has a grave in Moscow as the man who saved the world. And people don't generally know about it. There's a good movie. It's called The Man Who Saved the World. It's quite a story. So, I don't know. The public's kind of in the dark about a lot of these things. And interesting if we find out about them one after another, way after the fact usually.
Well, that's super interesting that coming from the top of Russia was do not bomb America before they bomb us. I mean, is that correct?
What? The risk was to the American fleet, because he was going to send a nuclear torpedo up a Jewish ship and blow it up. And if there had been a nuclear explosion among our fleet, it would have been. But
the order from the top, the representative on the sub that was higher than the commander, who obviously, spoke.
Right. He was a political commander on the ship, a party representative.
And so
the commander was an old guy who was just, God, we're going to do our duty for the fatherland and blow the suckers up. That would have been the end of a lot of Americans.
Jay, why do you think that the CIA gets us involved in those wars that JFK didn't know about? Like, why do you think they're doing that, or what comes to mind?
Well, we ought to change the subject back to archaeology, I think. But they've been running amok for a long time. They got the power to run secret wars and stuff. They've been out of control. They were formed. They're not a forever thing. I mean, they were formed from the OSS after. There's interesting books about it, how it happened after World War II, and I've read that the folks that set it up in the beginning ended up regretting it. because it's done a lot of more damage than good overall. And if you read books about the CIA, there's lots of them that conclude that.
That they regretted it, the ones that set it up.
Yeah, because it got out of hand. And the guys in charge just had too much secret power, and they could do what they liked and back these dictators around the world. They didn't make decisions based on American principles.
Do you think that they were communist in tendency or anti-communist in tendency?
I'm not sure how to answer your question. They're obviously, and what they were saying was that, of course, they were anti-communist, and they did a lot of things that were contrary to our beliefs and principles of freedom on this business of anti-communism. I mean, the whole story of Vietnam is the same thing. Vietnam started as a CIA war to begin with, before the Army got in. That's just another example of CIA getting out of control. Of course, they had death squads running all over. Lansdale was very involved. It's just head of it. I think he was one of the CIA, one of the JFK figures. It's just running amok. It's very interesting. Supposedly Americans believe in the right of people to determine self-determination. And Quebec wanted to get free of Canada, right? Recently, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, whenever it was. Recently, I remember that, and there was this plebiscite in Canada to decide whether Quebec was going to be allowed to break away from Canada. And we agreed with the process. I mean, it was supposedly, yeah. And the Free Quebecers, they lost the election. They didn't leave Canada. Probably, these kind of things happen now and then. And I thought that was a very peaceful way to resolve the issue. And so did a lot of people that it was in accord with the right of people to vote and the self-determination. All right. But Lincoln didn't do that. He forced war in the United States and put journalists in jail that objected to what he was doing and so on. We don't even abide by our own principles a lot of the time. It's strange.
I just saw a movie or a TV show where the Union literally went down to the South. What was that? It was Clint Eastwood, and you had these rebels in Missouri. What movie was that? Josie, yeah. The Legend of Josie Wales, I think. And I mean, the Union was tough. They were killing, people. I mean, is that an order from Abraham Lincoln, was to, if you don't go with us, then we kill you? I mean, was it that type of force?
Wars are pretty terrible. I don't know that. I haven't seen that movie, so I don't. Let's change the subject back to something archaeological, which is what I'm trying to do here.
Well, go ahead. Take the conversation wherever you want to.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a very interesting subject that I've gotten into through some friends in Ohio. I've been giving lectures on archaeology in Michigan for 14 years now, and I'm going there again next month. And and at the MES in Ohio, and I've gotten through friends, I've gotten involved with this Burroughs Cave situation, which is very a name that you can throw on the internet, and you'll find that a lot of people call this whole thing fake, that everything's been found that came out of the cave is fake, that the whole thing is nonsense, and so on. And I understand my associate Jim Schertz is a emeritus professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. Talked with the state archaeologist in Illinois at one point, and they just kind of ushered him out of the room and said, no, you can't talk to us about Burroughs Cave because it's all fake and it's nonsense, and just we're not going to deal with that. We want to be out of here. On the other hand, We don't want to have anything to do with it. It's embarrassing. You know, people that are archaeologists, they don't want to do it. So, but the problem is that they got this law that if you find any bodies or tombs, you got to report them to the state right away. Because now we know where the cave is and we're working on it. I'm helping the group with doing the work. I wanted to show you a couple of stones that I think people would find interesting so that we can change the subject into archaeology. As you know, we've discussed in the last time we recorded, did a little recording. It was Cleopatra's son with Mark Antony named Helios, or the sun, S-U-N, that was taken at the age of 9 on Mauritanian ships and brought to the New World on routes that were known for thousands of years to keep him from being killed by the Romans, because they had put to death Cleopatra's older son by Caesar, Caesarea. And the ships had loaded, I showed you last time, I got a Jewish cat. There's Africans and a lot of people of various nationalities that were apparently on this ship, or many ships, we don't know. The whole fleet disappeared, they say. And Mauritania was a very prosperous Roman province. After it had a lot of gold. At any rate, this kid, Helios, because he was royalty, and they thought in those days that royal personages deserved more respect than most people. They were higher and better in so many ways, whatever. So he was the ruler of this colony for his lifetime, which would have been, we think the cave existed from around 10 BC on for about 500 years. And the cave, which is one of many caves, we think there are other caves like Burroughs Cave. They're on private property. People don't have the permission to work on this project at the moment. But we think there are others. That this colony existed a long time. So it would have been the sons of Helios and so on that became the rulers after that. But we have a lot of funerary stones that say, that are like this. I'm going to show you them. This is a photo, or well, this is a picture of a stone. And at the bottom, see if I can, there, it's a curved stone, so it's hard to read. But there's an A-I-I or a B-I-I. It's backwards on the thing. When I look at it, it's V-I-I first. It's been turned around optically. But at any rate, and here's a guy in middle age with a hat, strange hat, maybe a Mauritanian sort of type hat, African. But his image appears on many stones and in different hats. I've got him in maybe half a dozen different hats, which is interesting. And this A-I-I down here is, they say, is pronounced Ali, or Ali, which is kind of strange because in Hawaii, the royalty were called Ali'i. And there's even an Ali'i drive on Maui, is along the waterfront. Here's another thing that's interesting. This is a stone. One of the cave, these were stolen out of this cave illegally. So these are illegal objects. And they're worthless because they're called fake, so I can't get them appraised. Although they're unique and they're one of a kind and they're effectively priceless. This is another one. This one shows an Indian headdress here on this guy on one side. And a guy with a lot of hair over on the other. With, I think, a religious sign. So that's a religious figure, whether it's Jesus or not, I'll leave up to you. But he's come across the water, you see, at the bottom. The Indians on the land, the Jesus figure, the whatever, in a robe, has come across the water, okay? And they're holding out their hands to one another. So that there was not a lot of violence, unlike what the Spanish did. Here they are, they're trying to be friends. And look at the hands, the thumb is up, one finger's out, and another finger is out. It's kind of a strange looking little handshake, okay? Kind of fun because in Hawaii, the locals always go like this, you know, hey bro, you're a bro or a Filipino Hawaiian if you do this, sticking out your car window as you pass people.
Shaka shaka.
So I just sold a condo over there to a friend who's from got his master's degree in computer science from the capital of from Bishkek, which is the capital of Kyrgyzstan. Wonderful guy, and his wife has a master's degree in computer science also. He's darkened up from teaching himself surfing. He looks like a Filipino Hawaii local. I can't tell what a Bishkek guy from Bishkek normally looks like. Anyway, they think he's local, so we're driving around, and I'm on this white guy, and he's on the other side of the Jeep. And as we pass cars, the cars are all going, hey bro, they think he's a local. And he's from Bishkek. Anyway, fun.
Well, Jay, do you want me to jump in with some questions, or do you want to tell another story?
What do you want to do?
Okay. Tell us about your travels over the last 25, 30 years, where you've gone, with an emphasis on archaeological investigations and a lot of them. Just tell us where you've gone, photos that you've taken, and where you've been. This will be very important to share with everybody.
All right. Well, you know, it's kind of I'm not an archaeologist, but there's a family history of it. My dad died at 103 a couple of years ago, and he gave a lecture to his home where he was living. He had a little apartment. It was entitled 3 Generations of Archaeology, because his grandfather had been walking down the beach in North Truro and found a brass bowl. And they thought it came off a wrecked ship that had wrecked on the Peaktail bars of Cape Cod, and known to have wrecked long before the Mayflower. And so there's pieces from this apparently is a piece, this little brass bowl, that big ring, brass. My dad knew what he was doing. And it's it was washed out of an Indian grave during a storm onto the beach, and his grandfather found it walking up the beach, and washed out of an Indian grave from a French shipwreck, 1600 or so. So my grandparents always had a relic room there, and lots of things in it, from Revolutionary War and from the War of 1812. So it was an interesting place for me as a kid to see all this stuff. And so then I got interested in, I've always kind of been interested in this stuff. It's since childhood, but it wasn't until my dad read that ABC book by Barry Fell that I took it more seriously. And I'd gone to Dartmouth College, which has no archaeology, no anthropology, no nothing. It's just basic chemistry and English and mathematics and stuff. So after I read the book, Susie and I went back to the reunion there, climbed a little hill in North Pomfret. And here was a stone building up on the top of the mountain, just like Barry Fell was saying, that it's early Celtic stuff. And so since then, we've been traveling. And I've been, I met in Karnak, a Dutch fellow who his studies were in physical chemistry, which is a very difficult subject to people who are taking it. A lot of mathematics. He's very mathematically counted everything. And we traveled together in Europe for many years together. This little diesel station wagon out of Holland. And sometimes I'd rent cars and we just run them ragged in the mountains in Spain. So what was interesting is that we never met anybody doing just what we were doing. That is traveling to all these megalithic sites all through Europe. There were tourists for sure, but nobody was doing the kind of inventory study that we were doing. It's kind of interesting. And we focused on what we could find interesting at first, which were petroglyphs, and that was the first book on how the sun god reached America, because we were able to decipher a number of these petroglyphs in early pictographic writings. And they're in that book. Then later we got more into the rows of stones down in Karnak and on the coast of France and Jonge. There's a number of them north of Karnak. And son of a gun, you count the stones, like my buddy did, and Reinoud did, and it was amazing that we could make sense out of what these people had done. Humans had lined these stones up by the thousands of Karnak, and not without knowing what they were doing. They couldn't record their language. It's all in late prehistory, but they could count, and intentionally putting these things in with intention. When we first, go ahead.
Do you think that men did that work of lifting those stones? You don't think there was UFO and help or anything?
We got to Sligo in Ireland, and there's a big ancient graveyard there outside with many stone circles. I don't know, 10 of them, I don't know, a lot of stone circles. And we're standing around looking at these stone circles, and Reinoud puts his coat on one of the stones and says, okay, we're going to count this stone. So you start counting the stones, 1, 2, 3, and you just walk around. I mean, the mathematics we've been using has just been like the old timers, one at a time, and we count them. There's 37 stones. And then we count another stone circle, puts his coat on a stone and goes around. It's either going to be, he says it's either going to be 38, 37, 39. It's going to be one of those numbers. And it was in every case.
And was that the exact latitude of the sites, or?
That's the latitudes of the Azores Islands. They were considered the western home of the sun god for 800 years because they couldn't get further west against the trade winds. Okay? So you see this stuff when you travel. I mean, tourists are going through that Sligo graveyard, ancient megalithic site, every day now. And they don't know what they're doing because they don't count them. There's no publication out there that says, hey, you should count these stones. There's going to be 38 stones there. That's the Central Azores. That's where Pico is. That's where this big volcano sticks up in the ocean. You can see for 60 miles away. The little harbor there, which has been there for thousands of years, has a pyramid in it, which the Portuguese archaeologist says its origins unknown. So, you know, it's you just have to put together a lot of pieces because we're dealing with stuff way back in the past, and there's nothing. It's not put together. You have to put together this stuff yourself, and you can with enough traveling around, looking at enough sites. It's a long way in the past. It's interesting and it's a good job, but that's what we did our traveling, Chris. We just went to megalithic sites all over Europe, from up in the Shetlands and Orkneys, on down south all the way to Gibraltar. I haven't been down to Lixus. One of my friends was down there.
And did you?
He travels around by himself. He's a little Jewish guy. He got attacked But and he got attacked in Cusco. It's the only place that he's been attacked. But generally, I'm with my friends, and I'm kind of a good guy. Generally, we're in places where the food's good and the people are fun, and you can stay in youth hostels and meet professors that are traveling around on the cheap. And yeah, it's fun.
Do you think that the Shetland Islands and the Orkney Islands, did you think that there was a Knights Templar presence there, or was it more Norse? What was your impression of that?
Templars are later. Yeah, there's Norse stuff all over the place, but we're not looking for that. Yeah, I mean, the whole town there, the cities in those places are named, have Norse names. So there were Norse territories. They were owned by the Norse.
But you're looking for stuff that's way older. And how old are those monuments? And the megaliths, the stone circles.
The megalithic monuments in New York.
Yeah,
they're about 3,000 BC, which is 5,000 years ago.
4,000 BC.
Well, they crossed the ocean about 2,500. They're about 3,000 BC, about 5,000 years ago. They're about 3,000 BC. Yeah. There are major excavations going on over there now. We talked about it the last time we did the talk. So I probably shouldn't do it again. But yeah.
And so
they were trying to find their way to the west, and they knew there were islands out there. And so and in the old days, there were huge herds of walrus and stuff up there. And they probably harvested the tusks and so on and ate them, like humans do. They'd lived there so long, maybe the walruses are gone by 2,000 BC, I don't know. But they were known to have been there. People. But be back maybe after people, if there's still water. That's the controversy.
And
when I was there were lots of seals offshore and lots of seabirds and stuff. Beautiful place to go. Of course, dangerous to drive because they don't put lines on the middle of the roads. The roads are only 1 lane wide. You're passing big trucks going past. No trees. It's an interesting place. I was kind of scared to drive there. But I drove on Sanday Island, which is a little more northern island. That was no traffic at all. No car. I mean, I was lucky to get a car. But it was wonderful. I mean, the 6-room hotel, I got a bum to ride out to it. There was only one car got up the ferry. They managed to get me in there on top of that electronic equipment. We get out to this little, go about 6 miles, a little 6-room hotel, 8-room hotel or something. Nice little guy. I said, where can I rent a bicycle so I can ride around this place? And she said, well, there aren't any. You don't want that anyway. Go down the end of the dock there and get a car. Look down the dock. This is Storm Pier, and I look down there, and there's a guy in orange coveralls. She says, yeah, him, talk to him. I go down there and I ask the guy, the gal in the hotel says, you have cars down here. He says, yeah, take that one. I look at this little beater next to me, there's 2 of them. He points at one of them and he says, take that one. I said, what? And he says, yeah, just take that one. The key's in it. I said, really? He says, yeah, just never take the key out. It's never been out. And so I sit in it and I look at it and I turn the key a little bit and there's half full of gas. I said, well, you got a gas station or somewhere where replace the gas I use? He says, no, you can't put that many miles on the car. Don't worry about it. There's no gas. Just use it. Put it and bring it back. And when you're done, and I said, don't you want to know my name and everything? He says, or a credit card or anything? He says, no, you look honest to me. Just go ahead and take it. And so, but it says, when you're done, just park it here where it is and give $20. Give $20 to the hotel manager. That's what it's like as a tourist.
And that was Shetlands or Orkneys?
Or that's the Orkney Islands. There was no tourists there.
Wow.
There were megalithic tombs washing into the ocean.
Wow.
Literally, just great big. They're made out of flat stones, and there's ones across the top and ones on the side. And some of them are right on the beach. Some of them there's nothing left. Some of them are just falling apart. They're all along the shore. Amazing. And then there's stuff sticking up out of the ground everywhere. There's one of them that's been rebuilt and made into a monument.
And did the Irish have a presence there?
back on a different island. Is there what?
Did the Irish have a presence there?
That's a complicated question. A lot of the Irish were immigrants from Scotland, okay? And so there were Celts. And so what are you talking about? I mean, the Orkneys are off of northern Scotland, and yeah, they're populated with people from that part of Scotland today. They live a harsh life, always have. The outdoors, there's no trees, the wind blows, cold. And so the Hudson Bay Company of Canada found that that was the best recruiting ground in the world for people that would serve as employees for the Hudson Bay Company. And then they recruited people there for many years for that, because they could stand the cold.
Did you notice any like line of sight at the top of hills that you could communicate with the other islands, or any mounds on the top of hills, or nothing like that?
The islands are bare and you have to take ferries that are miles apart. You really can't, and they're not high. You don't see distance.
I see.
It's a wonderful place to travel. It's interesting like that. One of my favorite places, actually.
Thank you for sharing it with us. It sounds very cool. So tell us about Crete and the adventures on the island there.
Well, a lot of tourists in Crete, of course. And we were there in the spring, because we usually travel in April and May, because Europeans go on vacation, they get out of Paris where it's too hot, and travel everywhere, and all these other European cities. So we're traveling in the spring before those vacations, before the European tourists get there, and before American tourists come in the summer. And so, rental cars are available. There's always rooms. You don't have to book ahead. So in Crete in April, when we were there, there's bushes along the sides of the roads that are about 6 feet high, run for miles and miles, and they're all red. The flowers were spectacular at that season. So it was wonderful traveling. The roads used to be terrible, but the EU has put in wonderful big roads in Crete. So it's like going to Michigan. It's got beautiful roads and nobody's there anymore. It's you can drive all over very easily. It's a very easy place to be a tourist in that time season. I haven't been there other seasons, of course. So I don't know. All right. And now there's tourists at the tourist sites like Bistos and Maya, but there weren't crowds. It was wonderful because again, I found confirmations of theories that we're working on. There's a foundation stone where the archaeologists are working. One of the great big stones where the palace had been, that was washed out by the 4 19-meter tsunamis that came from the eruption of Santorini. And so they just got foundation stones. They're doing huge amounts of work. They have very big plastic, coverings over the archaeologic digs that they're doing. One of these foundation stones had a carving of a sailboat at anchor. And the same carving, literally the same carving, the same size, is on an oxide ingot that was pulled out from 300 feet underwater Greece off the Ulibarun. So basically, it tells me that Michigan copper was the Minoans were known to be the dealers of copper in the Mediterranean. They were selling these 60-pound ingots of copper and became a wealthy civilization. Europe's first big civilization was on Crete, and it was funded by the sale of copper, and the copper is from Michigan. And this particular ingot on the Ulibarun was went through the harbor of Malia, because it had a lot of them had these little carvings knocked into them, and that one is duplicated in Malia, which is interesting. Again, all those markings on the ingots, which can be seen in the museum there, and, they were all studied in great detail, and examples of them in the museum. Old ancient, which is ancient Peloponnesus, and they've got them all in the museum. You don't see them all, but you see some.
Tell us, didn't you see pottery that was just scattered all over the beach? But the rule was you can't take one piece of that away, obviously.
Yeah, unless you want to spend a little while in a Turkish prison. I think that's something people understand. The tsunamis knocked down the big palaces. They were all on the North Shore Creek. And one of my friends is going over there soon. I'm going to show him the map, which is where I'm going to show him the site they should go to. On the very eastern tip of Crete, there's two things. If you take the southern road, you get down to where the water is so shallow for miles. I mean, it's just amazing. It's shallow. It's a couple inches deep for about as far as you can see. The water must be wonderfully warm for swimming, which we didn't do. We were busy doing it. Want to get salty and try to deal with it. Maybe we should have gone in the water, but I think that the swimming would be wonderful out the south. And there Minoan. I don't know if there's ruins, but at least there was a presence there, and that was discussed in the materials, and you could see some things, but not good. But if you take the road to the north, it ends up in an area where the roads kind of wander around behind the beach, around some trees, and then at the north end of the beach is a restaurant. Everybody's sitting out; it's over the water. You look down the beach, and here's all these people sitting in this restaurant. And you go down the beach, which is a little to the south, there's a Minoan palace washing in the water.
Wow.
Because the tsunamis that came in there just destroyed these palaces. Right? There's also on the map, the reason why you go to this place a little south of this restaurant is that there's other ruins there, which where the like you say, the shards of the pottery are just, you're walking on it, dozens of them. I mean, it's just paved with shards. And it's Hellenistic, it's later, okay? But if you're down on the beach, you can see these stone steps going down into the water that have stones on them. Because the water has washed the stones up onto these stairs, onto this staircase. I mean, but if I had brushed away the stones, I could have taken a picture of the stone staircase. It was walking up into a cliff of dirt, objects and rocks and stones and pottery.
So
right in front of me there was a red dish, about 8 inches diameter. There's a pottery dish about like so, a red pottery that had just come out of this cliff face. It was sitting there on the beach. Yeah.
Wow.
And if I had picked that up, they'd say, "Oh, you're stealing this from Crete." You can't. I didn't even touch it. I didn't touch it. I took a picture of it. I posted in my library. But at any rate, the whole all these 4-story palaces were destroyed, and all the parts are, of course, laying there on the ground, and now the ocean is washing it back, taking it back. I'm gonna suggest you go there and see what there might be these days. See if you can find that stone staircase and so on.
So how far do the Minoans go back living on Crete?
You're asking me something I don't know. Well, I do a little though, because there have been studies of early sailing in the Mediterranean, because they didn't think, as usual, they didn't think people would know how to sail. So, but they found shards, that is, chip stones, not pottery, but stone, chip stone, which they dated in this research article I read to 40,000 BC. So they think that early man has been on these islands in the Mediterranean since then, for very long. Now, they didn't become wealthy until who knows when. I mean, they were trading the Minoan civilization. When did it start? Before 3000 BC. Well, we don't know how early, but they became very wealthy by selling all this copper to the Egyptians and to the Sardinians and so on.
And so the volcano Thera happened in about 1650 BC, right?
Yeah.
And then the Mycenaeans and the other groups took over Crete. That kind of wiped out the Minoan sailors. What happened to those sailors that were still, had their knowledge and alive?
I don't know. The trade of copper evaporated, was over. The ships, I don't think they had a fleet anymore. The tsunamis would have wiped that all. You can see the way boats are moored in Crete. They put an anchor out off the bow and take a line to shore. And the boats are just laying there off the beach. The Zach boats, they were there just like that. Now you can go down to, and that's what they did all along the coast of Crete. So when the tsunamis came in, the fleet was just eliminated. Now there are down by toward western Crete, there's some there's a big harbor. It's beautiful, and Minoan ruins there. Maybe some boats made it through the. They say the Mycenaean fleet was protected by the harbors they were in and the other side of the Peloponnesus and things, and so they weren't destroyed. They came in and took things over. But part of the story is not just the pirate, not just the waves, but the tidal, this huge tsunami, but the pyroclastic flows, which come out of a volcano and travel across the water at high temperatures to very high speeds. And they say those put everything that survived the tsunamis to death by cooking. Even Feistos, which is on the other side of the mountains, that was destroyed at the same time. I mean, that's how bad the things were. Right? The civilization was just absolutely like that.
And so some of those Minoans perhaps became the Phoenicians later. Is that possible? Or the sea people that they were traveling?
Became part of the what?
Well, some of those Minoans with the seafaring knowledge, that's, you have the Phoenicians, you have the sea people, did some of that perhaps join with those groups, the Minoan traders?
Well, they tried to, wherever you make a big profit by trading, it becomes a secret. And so a lot of these Phoenicians and so on are known not to have told. In fact, the Phoenician went to Britain and sank his ship because he was being followed. He was rewarded hugely in Carthage because he had sunk his ship rather than reveal where he was going. These are trade secrets, and difficult to know who learned what from who when. So it's just not an easy thing to trace. The Minoan civilization, Minoan stuff is found all through Greece. I've been to the museum in Greece not too long ago, and the museums at Mycenae full of Minoan stuff. So it was like the grandfather civilization, artwork. Is clearly Minoan. on this stuff. Whether
And
the objects are actually Minoan or not.
and so the Minoans had this. Can they for sure say that it was a female-centered civilization, or was it perhaps female and male run? Or, I mean, these women with bare-breasted chests kind of walking around, was it a female-centered society?
Yeah, they think so, that the women had powerful roles in society. The same with the Beaker people. Yeah.
Same with the Beaker people, who were the Adena, the Bell Beakers, the Adena is that, yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad we don't have the same tradition. I mean, the breasts are a beautiful feature of the women. It's too bad they can't exhibit them more. You know, some societies do and some don't, unfortunately.
Did you ask any of those museums to do any testing on any artifacts or anything? They wouldn't allow that, would they?
Would allow what now, Chris?
To do any type of testing on these artifacts that they have. They just don't allow that. They don't want to prove that any of that copper's from Michigan, right?
Well, I showed you last time we talked this little pennant that was dredged out of the Ohio River. And I knew that it's Minoan, and so and then I went through all the museums in Crete. There's 3 main cities, and museum in each one. The archaeologists are all women about 30 years old, 35 years old. And they've been trained as to what's Minoan and what isn't. And they knew, and they looked at it, and it was Minoan, no question. Because what I took were photos. I knew I couldn't bring it back out of the country because it can be found by all the metal detectors at the airports. At any rate, so I took photos and I was showing them pictures, and these women all, beautiful, whatever. They knew what they were looking at, and I did too by the time I saw more Minoan work, because they did very, very fine gold work and very fine. Just it's very high quality. And what you see, I bought similar sorts of things in the tourist shops, and it's a totally different ability and skill used in making stuff. So I enjoyed showing it, but when finally in Miraculon at the museum, this gal says, "Well, where did you get this thing?" and pushed me real hard as I was leaving, and I said it was dredged out of the Ohio River. And the gal said, "No, it wasn't." You knew better.
No, it wasn't.
You know, it's fun. The problem was the major museum in Miraculon was being remodeled at the time, and so. Now I think you'd have, if you went to Crete, you for sure want to go to the museum, because all I saw was some of the best stuff they put down in the basement somewhere. It was fine. Not as good as what you see now.
Okay, let's jump around. When I looked at your pictures on the wall, you had one of the Egyptian pyramid sites that had the construction, the stones were so compacted. And what was it theory or fact that you said that some of those pyramids are you talking about an ancient concrete, or are you talking about, what was your kind of alternative theory that's not accepted by mainstream on those pyramids?
Well, I'm not sure again about your question. I'm not sure that it isn't accepted these days. It isn't popularly understood by the public, but there's I think it's so well documented. There's a French scientist, and I don't have the book in front of me. Maybe if I'd known you wanted to bring this up, I would pull it out of the library. There's a French scientist who's done a book, and actually it's one book, and I thought there's three of them. I thought, well, it was only $10. I thought, geez, I better get everything this way. He's a rock scientist, Um, his book is so interesting and so good. And I thought I did all his books. Well, it turned out each book had different covers, but it was all the same book on the inside. So there's one book.
Hate when that happens.
French guy, French scientist, and you know, he has shown. Well, he actually made a number of jugs. It started out with some stone heads made of granite, and he made them because he's been studying rock science. He's a specialist in concrete. In fact, his CV, on his CV, he runs about 3 pages. He's a consultant to all the major concrete companies in the world. Amazing. Guy's amazing. And he had these stone heads, and he showed them to Egyptologists. And they all said, yeah, we recognize those heads. Granite stone. When they were carved, you know, they said, oh, yeah. They told him just what quarry they came from and when they were carved and the whole deal. And he said, no, I made it in my basement. And well, you know, it turns out that the ancients, way back in with the clues and so on, that they first dynasties had understood stone technology better than we do today. And they were able to do things that we still do not do. And obviously we can do them now because this guy can do it. I mean, it's known. But it wasn't for a long time. And basically, I read his book in great detail, and I could see what he did in his book is he described each of the pyramids in Egypt and how they're different from one another at different dates, and the designs are different, and they're manufactured a little differently, and how they go from this type of pyramid to this type to this type to this type, and these in the red temple, it bleeds a little, and that's because the chemicals are coming out. You could just follow the book through these temples, through these pyramids, and basically his thesis, which I think he's proven, I walked around the big Khufu pyramid, and I'm justified as far as I was concerned, that the reason, okay, that these, that the blocks are mostly limestone blocks, and they're made from material that was dug up and carried up a ramp in buckets. Right? And they were manufactured. That's why they fit so well to each other. I mean, they're very tight on most sides. So, like you're building a block, you have to put a wooden wall on 1 or 2 sides of the block, right? The rest of it fits because you're just pouring it in a hole that has wood on 1 or 2 sides. All right, that's how the pyramid was built. And they knew how to harden with various chemicals, like the salts, natron, there's a salt down there, so on. They knew how to make these things. But the problem was that they learned over time, and then they ran out of some of the stuff that was being used. So the actual manufacture of the blocks at the different pyramids are different. Yeah. Eventually they ran out of everything, and they just started making them out of bricks again. You know, it's there's a whole sequence to the development of these pyramids, and the way they're designed and the way they're built. This book shows how it was done. And
Wonderful.
Makes complete sense. So I'd say that, and he can replicate these things. So and it makes a lot of sense in many ways, but in terms of manpower, in terms of where the the stuff was dug up because there's holes in the ground. You know, I mean, it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Looked at the other theories and nothing else. This guy is nailed it.
Do you see similarities to the pyramids in South America? Any of them that you went to there, or?
There are pyramids in Mauritius and everywhere. Yeah, Indonesia. There's pyramids all over the world, and nobody knows. No one knows. Has a good explanation, because they go back. In Egypt, they're not necessarily that old. They're only 3,000 BC, but maybe there was a worldwide culture that spread all over the world that quickly, maybe. But then you got this one's made out of basalt, and then the basalt monument, you know. It's a pyramid inside a hill, enormous. Padang, Upadang, or so. You know, there are plenty of people that say that there was extraterrestrial influence in the design of these things. Maybe there was. I know that there's been extraterrestrial civilizations here a number of times. They've come and gone. We have stone records from several, 2 or 3 of them. I do. The ones down in Peru, ones in Mexico. Yeah. So it's maybe they had influence. Or maybe they just got around to these ideas. Why the construction of the pyramid? I don't know. My friend thinks there were energy building, energy factories to make electricity or off the Earth grid. Or it's understudied. And my friend in Bosnia has a huge pyramid. It's actually the world's biggest. It's the blocks are laid on top of one another, and it's the fashion that makes them look like certainly man-made. And they're measuring the energy beams coming out of the top of this pyramid.
Jay, did you have a story with Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian head of antiquities?
Yeah, he's busy giving tours to university groups this week. I mean, I got a brochure. You can take a tour in Hawass and show you around. Got another story, kind of a personal story. I've never met him, but one of my friends here in the neighborhood where I live in here now in Anna, her husband was number 2 guy in the U.S. National Park Service, and doing a tour of Egypt, and Hawass was entertaining him a little, had him for dinner. And she said around the dinner table, Hawass said, would you like to buy some antiquities? So Hawass is selling Egyptian antiquities on the side. So my respect for the guy is not real high.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't take one of his tours.
Yeah.
It's also been difficult for people who want to do studies over there with ground penetrating radar. He's very possessive about what can and can't be done by people coming in. I think this guy's got pretty much a mixed bag, you know. He was out of power for a while, now he's back into it again, I guess. He maybe has done some good stuff. They've got a new museum in Cairo that's apparently spectacular. I haven't been in it, but I know that the ship that's remarkable up by that was found and put together, you know, out of the boards next to the big pyramid there. That big ship has been put into a shipping container with about 40 tires under it. And the whole thing's been moved down into the center of Cairo into the new museum. I just saw on the internet a picture of the thing being moved. They got a painting of the ship along the side of the container. It's spectacular.
Wow.
I mean, I've never seen so many tires on a truck as they built for this to move this ship. it's quite a big ship. If you're going to Egypt, it's maybe the number one thing to see, in my opinion. The wooden ship.
Well, thank you for that. He's definitely restricted access below the Sphinx, right? I mean, some of this stuff is not accessible to people.
That's not acceptable. What are you talking about?
Accessible.
Accessible. What's not accessible?
I think below the Sphinx, there was definitely some stuff down there, and below.
The Sphinx has never been opened up. Yeah, they say with ground penetrating radar, the chambers under there and so on and so on. But it's not been opened. It's not known if there's anything there to open. For a while, they weren't letting people in to see the Saqqara tombs where they buried the bulls, supposedly, in the great big sarcophagi that have got absolutely perfectly square edges and stuff. Been studied by Dunn, my friend Dunn, down there. Unbelievable. They use some kind of fancy machines to make those things. And how they got them in there, no, it's just unknown. And for a long time, people weren't allowed down in there. They were, and then they weren't. They didn't get in there now. I don't know. One of the girls at AAPS married an Egyptian at one point, and her children were playing in the underground tunnels under the pyramids and stuff. And there's big steel gates that keep them out now. So yeah. And Hawass will tell you, oh, there's no tunnels. She says, yeah, but my kids are playing in them.
Well, he is
say that to go to the underworld, you got to go through these tunnels and down the rivers that are underwater, in the tunnels. Yeah. It's a way to go to the underworld. They're going to get into the underworld.
Well, Zahi Hawass is.
We don't know over there yet.
He definitely has had control of that, antiquities trade well before Mubarak and the other people in charge. And I know he did have that little break and then got back. The point is that any documentary that you ever see on Egypt, pretty much that I've seen, he is the guy interviewed, and he is the guy right there as the cave is opened. Which is just, he's got a major power and control over that country's antiquities.
Yeah. Somebody's staying in control. He's got, I don't know. People in power, they develop people around him to support him. I don't know how he maintains himself, I don't know the guy. I've never met him.
Well, the story with Sam, our mutual friend of the Bosnian pyramids, is that Zahi Hawass declared his pyramids in Bosnia fake without ever even going there.
Oh, not unusual, is it?
No, not unusual at all. And then an Egyptian archaeologist went down there and wrote a paper saying that the pyramids were real. He then came back to Egypt to be fired. That doesn't sound unusual either, does it?
No. If you're going to speak out, you better be retired like me.
Seriously. Tell us about a paper that you wrote about the Newberry tablets. What did they find in Newberry, Michigan? And was that a Minoan syllabary that were on some of those artifacts?
Newberry tablet is named for Mount. And the tablet has the Lord's Prayer in a very ancient version of Hebrew. I've got a copy of it. So it made out of clay, when it's painted up.
I didn't know if the symbols were similar to the Phaistos disc, which I also have a clay copy of that.
This disc, yeah, that's Minoan, and I have it too, and I've studied it. And when I studied it, I didn't like his interpretation. It's until or unless more of those symbols become found, that we won't be able to deal with it with any certainty. There's a lot of viable guesses at what it means.
But you thought those Newberry tablets were more Hebrew in their script than linear.
Hebrew script, they're known, they can read them.
Very good. Okay, and so the beakers, the Adina, which you say they had the, the round square jaw, and then the big hand at Copper Harbor in Michigan, that you put your big hand up there, and the hand was quite a bit bigger, 2 inches bigger. So you think these people were tall? Is that the thinking?
We were standing on an old beach, right on the sand, next to a outcropping of rock that went up about 10 feet. And I'm standing there next to a pine tree, and my friend Tom Teal is standing there with me. He says, "Hey, Jake, look behind that branch." I moved the branch. There's a hand on the wall. I put my hand up there, and the hand was bigger than mine, so I took a picture of my hand next to this thing. And it wasn't a deep petroglyph, but it was enough that the moss was growing differently in it and outside it. So it was a clear image. It's very clear. It's in my book, and I think other people have used it. There's a lot of talk about giants, and I think this is an artifact that shows that there were some very big people in among the crew of that boat that was loading copper there. Giants or bigger people giants. I don't know. I think there were bigger people, because in the tombs of Tierra Adentro down in Colombia, the tourists, in order to get tourists in and out of some of these tombs on the mountaintops down there, which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, they built additional steps in between the steps, because the steps were too big to get yourself up and down. And not only that, they were hollowed out on the inside. They were dug out. These things are maybe 20 feet squared on the inside, all painted up with bigger people patterns on them, triangles. So, and the stairs, they had to take all that material out, digging it up with easy salt volcanic turf or tough tufa, whatever. It's relatively soft, but it's 20 feet square, and a lot of digging and a lot of dirt to carry out in baskets or whatever to make these tombs. And they made a lot of other tombs that were like European style with slabs of rock and so on. But these underground hypogea have staircases coming up, and the stairs, you had to really, the ones that didn't have the little helper stairs added were very hard to get in and out of, because they're, like a yard apart. I mean, how do you do that? I know we were tired. We have to hike a lot to get up to these places. A couple of them up and do it early in the morning, and it's still cool and so on. But Andes, 2 degrees south, and hot. But I have photos of some of these tombs where they built little steps in between the steps, which make it a normal size step for people. It's still a big step, but you can do it, without having to get on your hands and knees and elbows and crawling out. So, in the books down there, the one by Wilkins on South America talks about giants. There's a lot of reference to giants in that. And of course, most of the giant stuff comes from
Jay.
the left was when Zoom decided to terminate us there. I was saying that a friend who was going through had a minder with him, went down to find something at the basement of the Smithsonian. Saw one of these giant skeletons hanging in a room. or in a room. I don't know if it was hanging or whatever. He said he saw the giant skeleton in the room, and he said, "Wow!" Said to the guy that was with him, "Hey, look at that! That's terrific! That's amazing!" And the guy says, "Yeah, we're not supposed to be down here," and hustled them out of there real quick. So, they've got the stuff. They just make it public.
I wonder how big it was.
Yeah, I don't know. They bought some. They bought some for. There's one that they recorded that they bought for $500. It was a big one. They number of them found in mounds. So, people weren't eating a lot of manufactured food, right? With natural food and so on, I think that there was large people, and there's a whole race of larger people in Siberia that have been found in the cave. So that's another whole other subject. But at any rate, this I think that the leadership of some of these societies in the Midwest and so on were led by big people. They think that it's the leaders of the non-believers were big, and they were obviously bigger, more capable, stronger, or whatever, and they made the leadership. And so a number of societies had leadership of these people.
Interesting. Jim Shears told me about one of the Indian groups that was led by a grandmother, a white-haired giant. All right, so 1200 BC, there was a worldwide catastrophe that ended the Bronze Age, and it was the comet Enki. Is that right?
We think so. Mm-hmm.
And it was noisy. And were there other impacts that come to mind that were a big deal?
Well, when you study the history of impacts, it's a complicated history and a lot of books, and we read a bunch of them. If you look at our book, Rocks and Roads, there's a couple of chapters on all this, and so I don't remember it well, but there's an event at 500 BC, and there's an event at 1250 BC. We think the 1251 was recorded on a man here in France. It's all in our book. It's quite a complicated study, and we had a guy named Ed Grandin from NASA who was an expert in this stuff, gave us a talk at one point. So we've researched this some, and the sum of it was, to me, was that the most important thing to me was this explanation of the end of the Bronze Age at 1198 BC. There was a 50-year or 100-year event that was thought to coincide with the breakup of Enki. We still see in the fall a little Enki. They think it's just always left circulating around up there, but they came down over this period, and so these Olmec recorded it in these figurines that they carved.
And was it a coincidence that was the end of the Bronze Age and the start of the Iron Age? Just the timing of that was kind of a coincidence, perhaps?
Well, they overlap. I mean, bronze tools are still used later, and they're still made later. But yeah, the Iron Age, technically, officially, the Iron Age follows the Bronze Age,
Okay.
Hundreds of years later.
All right. Well, Jay,
there were meteorites falling. It's not a complete black and white dividing line, because meteorites were found on the desert. You can still find them easily on the desert. There are black objects sitting on a white burning sand, So they'd pick them up, and that's what some of the swords were made from in the early days, from fancy steels and fancy nickel meteorites and so on that were from space. So there were some very hard special steels, and there was romance about all these swords, and some of them are meteoritic.
Jay, will you explain to us the melting process that went on down in Louisiana there, Poverty Point, Cedar Land, Claiborne? Just explain the process. The copper chunks come down the Mississippi in the summer months. They stop there. What happens then to get it into the ingots?
Copper's pretty rough when it's mined. And they had a short season before it got cold. They had to produce their own wood for the fire mining. So they had people cutting timber. They had people growing food. There's very big food areas, food growing areas. The weather would change, it'd be dramatic, and we haven't found a wrecked ship, but we know that Lake Superior is horrendous. The boat that takes people out to the national park there now only runs for like 2 months a year. The roughness of the water. Warships, warship got broken up and drowned all the people in it. So it's a short season, and I think that the copper was just taken, was loaded into, they stored it in a hull hole, or a hole that's about the size of a ship. They had holes where they just stored the stuff. Ship comes in, they load the ship, just like they did sandalwood in Hawaii. So ship to Asia for sandalwood. So the important thing here that is to get across is the difference between melting and smelting. It's important because smelting is a higher temperature process where you take an ore of copper, which can be yellow, can be green, and you have to melt it at high temperature and get the copper out. That's called smelting, and you get a lot of byproducts in the copper. But if you just melt over wood piles, melt copper, it'll form ingots which don't have these impurities in it. And that's the difference between Michigan copper and copper in the Middle East, where coppers are smelted from ores. And there are big areas in the Sinai and so on, and some pictures are amazing of the colors of the ground. Spectacular mine. Of course, suckers are dead. At any rate, they were high temperature smelted into copper, and they got nice copper out of it. And I have an artifact that is quite sure that it came from that kind of process. But it's sort of the origin of this true, I think. At any rate, Michigan copper was only melted, not smelted, because you didn't have that. It doesn't have much impurities. Now, it came with in the process of crystallization in the lava bed when the copper was formed in Michigan. Some silver is found crystallized in little lumps in the, not all mixed up in the copper, but in lumps, because each atom attracts another atom in lumps. Certainly, not all mines, but some of the mines, the miners knew it was quite valuable, and they take a little pocket knife and cut out hunks of silver and go home with a little pocket full of silver. Some of the mines had silver, some of them didn't. Now, that's one thing that's unique about Michigan copper. If you find silver in it, you know it's Michigan copper. So there's a story down in Cornwall of a farmer that found a arrowhead, and he's seen it down by the copper mines down there. Anyway, he wanted to know about the antiquity of it. As a farmer, he sends it into the British Museum for analysis. So what have I got here? And they said, what you got is Michigan copper. Now, in order for them to say that, they must have found silver in it. Copper, silver nodule. Otherwise, I don't know how to say that, because there was plenty of copper. Well, you accumulate all these little bits and stories, and it's funny, you don't get ones that prove your point wrong. I don't know. I can't rewrite anything. I've been working on this 25 years. How can there not be errors in my work? I don't know. I don't know. But when I find new things, like this little story in Cornwall, it makes sense to me. And somewhere, we can't be right, but so many of the stories support one another and make this Michigan copper story a real story that I think is valuable. And, I enjoyed working with you to develop a new movie script on the subject.
Thank you, Jay. It's a lot of fun talking about it and listening and learning and sharing, your 30 years of work with the world. And, it's just crazy that more people don't love this stuff. And, they have families and they're busy and they got to work. But I think at our core, we love this. I think everybody, humans, love history. They love this stuff. We just got
I want
to.
to teach it. I want to teach it through that film. Because, I've got a book and it sells to some people. Some people say it's just fabulous and so on. But it only goes to a few people and it's cheap. And I don't go on Facebook and promote it and stuff.
Well, these podcasts and the TV and the film, that's, that's the presence.
So, but a film would be good because, one of my favorite places to travel is the French coast, the northern French coast, which is west of Morlaix. And if you get the detailed map, you'll see some things on there on the map that you normally wouldn't see just driving the coast road. The coast road is spectacular. Run through these little towns, little 2-lane road running around between the rocks and the high tides and the low tides and the little towns and castles. Oh God, it's just spectacular. It's a wonderful place to travel. All right. And the people are nice and so on. So, a lot of times, but I'm traveling with my friend who's Dutch, and so he can speak French and make it easy for us. But at any rate, there's about a dozen standing menhirs in the farm fields that are about 3 foot, 30 feet, enormous stones. I mean, the French, nobody has any idea what they're doing standing there. Nobody. And nobody's looking at them either. I mean, you got to go up these little dirt roads around the farm fields. Oh, there's another one. Or there's one laying down. Or there's two, one halfway down. They're there. Most of them standing. And at the foot of them, there are petroglyphs on the stones in the ground, which I scraped a little dirt away. And there was a boat shape in the stone that wasn't even in the recording of that. And then another one, here's this flint chip off of making it, which was a flint scraper, right in the farm field. I mean, nobody's up there looking. This is what has been picked up.
What are they aligned to? The sunset or the solstices or?
Not that I can tell. There are carvings on some of them. Some of them are shaped. They're very interesting. Most of the pictures of most of them are in Rocks and Rose book in color. But which is on Amazon. If anybody wants to see them. But that's where I want to start. That's where I started the movie story. The grandfather explaining to the child what these are. That these are memorializing and recording the adventures of our people in previous generations. So your grandfather was lost on one of these voyages to the north. These are all memorializing our sailing adventures to the north to find where the sun god is and where it goes on the other side of the earth. What is on the backside of the earth? We're trying to find our way. And they know if they sail north, they go to the great, between Ireland and Britain, and then they go up to the Faroe Islands, and then they go across, the Orkneys, and where they established colonies, and a lot of people living up there. And then over the Orkneys, from the Orkneys to the Faroes, and then from the Faroes to Iceland. And then if they found when they found Iceland, it must have been a big excitement. That's maybe one of those stones. We don't know. But they're all looking over the ocean on the northwest tip of France. It's just about as far as they can go to the north, and they've built these huge monuments standing there. Yeah, they're amazing.
Did you notice, or is there any legend of any paint on them, or did you ever see any white paint on any of them?
They're from 3000 BC, so they're 5,000 years old. There's no paint on them anymore, unlike maybe something that's been preserved in Egypt somewhere underground. There's nothing. There's some carvings on some of them. There's one of them has a meteorite or comet carved in it, which we thought was probably dated to the 1200 BC comet event.
How many feet would these stones be underneath the ground?
Didn't dig them up. Enough that there's only, well, a couple of them are lying down. I guess you could, by measuring the ones that are lying down, you find out. I think they're probably about 5 feet down. That's about, the ones that are laying on the ground, if you could tell where they were at ground level before. I'm trying to do that. I mean, they're sticking in the ground long enough, far enough that most of them are still vertical.
All right, well, Jay, it is lunchtime. We're not going to get all of these mysteries in 3 hours on 2 podcasts, but we are trying to get closer to the truth. And maybe we've gotten a little closer, who knows? But it was fun at the very least. And we have more to talk about, next time. And let's think about what we want to talk about and explore. But great job. And thank you for doing it, Jay. It was fun. So.
You bet, Chris. Well, it's fun knowing you, and enjoy the projects we worked on together. And I hope you get a nice series out of all this.
All right. Well, you're going to be involved in all of it. So I have questions here for next time that we will dig into, and we'll talk about the movie and everything else soon. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chris.
All right. Tell Susie, thank you. I'll see you soon, buddy.
See you at AAPF. Okay, thank you.
Good job. Bye.
Yeah.